How to set goals properly. What I want to dive into today is our thought process about how to structure your goals to make sure they actually happen. One of my biggest frustration is when people are really motivated about setting a goal, but there's zero plan behind it to actually make it happen. So, Mandy and I, we're going to dive into a little bit of a thought process about how we approach this with our clients inside Body Reset. Mandy being a head clinical nutritionist, seeing their clients walk through the entire program, even in the first few months, but also what this looks like years into the program. So between the two of us, we've seen a lot of clients really set goals that have both been really helpful and have been really vague and a bit fluffy. So where I think we'll start is, I guess, the space of what's the difference between a goal and a wish, right? Like really setting some intention behind them. And we went through a big old coach training with our team this morning, really diving into the weeds of this so that they can be absolute experts talking to their clients as well. To make sure that there's a layer of feeling. And that's kind of an interesting space to start, I think, because when you look at the goal, I like to set it this way of think about where you want to be in 12 months from now. Say it's the end of 2025 and you're listening to this podcast again, or you're thinking about coming back to this podcast and you've achieved certain things in the last 12 months. What would those things need to be in order for you to feel like it's been a successful year? What are those things that you would have needed to have done? Have a think about that now and look at some of those goals that really come up, because initially there might be certain financial goals, certain weight goals, certain X, Y, and Z material goals. But I think being able to really settle into that space of how do you feel? What are those key feelings that you have? Is there pride? Is there resilience? Is there, whatever that thing might be for you? I think it's a really cool place to start, because there's not just the logical, like this sounds cool. It's that emotively feels like it's motivating and something I'd like to work towards.
I like to ask that question in another way, which is, what does it mean to you? So you can state the thing you want to achieve, but what does it mean to you? Because that's also how it's going to feel. It means I'll be proud of what I've done. I'll be proud of myself. I'll feel fulfilled, or something along those lines. So I asked this question. My husband and I were talking about this a weekend ago or whatever, just chatting through it. Like, what exactly that question that you just asked, Ollie, of what at the end of 2025, what would it feel like what would you have to have done to feel proud and all those sorts of things. And it's funny how when you ask that question, the first thing that comes up is actually just a list of jobs you want to do.
Yeah.
Want to have done this, and this. But then
Yeah.
if you sit with it for a while and you're like, why? What do those actually mean? Like, what does that feel like? And you explore a little bit more deeper there, it makes a whole lot more sense, and it lands a lot better, I think, than just, it's a list of things that I need to have ticked off by the end of 2025.
Yeah, and the big, I guess, reason that that's so important, there's many reasons, but the first one that I think is most important, that if a goal is made logically, you can also logically talk yourself out of it. Like, oh, that wasn't that important. It was like, you're right, because you only went one layer deep.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to go like, how would that feel? What does that need to mean to you? Then you really start to really have a driver, a North Star behind it that you can't argue in 2-3 weeks when it just gets a bit hard, right? So I think being able to really sit with that moment and go a bit deeper into the feelings component does allow you to get there much quicker.
It also allows you to, what's that line? Be committed to the goal but flexible on the approach. And I think if your goal is, for example, to feel healthy at the end of 2025, you might set the action of, I'm going to do this or do that, but then something happens and you can't continue that, or you need to change course, but you can still maintain that goal of how am I going to feel healthy, and you might change what you do. So if you set the goal as like a physical thing, you're a bit stuck on your approach. You've got to do that thing. But if you set it as a feeling or an outcome that's more determined that way, it allows you to navigate the twists and turns of life a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. If you want to get fit and your approach is running and you get sore knees in 2 weeks, then change your approach and maybe you can still get fit through swimming, but your knees are good.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a perfect example of what you just mentioned of, get that idea of that feeling, that overall outcome that you truly want. And then those approaches might change over the course of the year. And how many times are a new project or a new work line or an injury might change completely your approach in that space, or the amount of time you have available, etc. That just allows you to make sure you still have a strong North Star, but you're flexible on your way to get there.
Yeah, so important.
Yeah. So the next part of this that I think is really helpful, you've got this overall goal. We've gone a couple layers deeper rather than what it just looks like logically. Now we're starting to look a little bit deeper into like the obstacles. And I think this is a really cool way to look at goals. And I've the more we've done this with clients over the last 2 or 3 years, especially, has been okay, cool. We've got a goal. Now, what's going to get in your way? And
Mm,
there's so many people that will look at you and be like, what do you mean? I'm trying to feel good right now. And I was like, no, exactly. Why are you motivated? Let's set a plan. Let's set a strategy so that when you find that first, night where you haven't slept very well, or you're really hungry and there's nothing good in the house, or your work's got crazy and you're running out of time, like those are all constraints that make you feel tired, grumpy, and less likely to follow through. But your inability to plan for obstacles is fundamentally an inability to plan because you're just wishy washy looking at the good times. And I think if you're in the middle of January listening to this or later in the year, it's a really nice way to really sit in that moment and be like, what are the things in the past that have gotten my way? What are the things that I keep running into that becomes that roadblock? And how can we set a strategy around it? So, some of the key ones that keep coming up for our clients is always those preparation components, that sort of finding the time and anchoring it into our day, having those sort of mental strategies to have, I guess, that little analogy or that little motto that they lean on.
mm,
One of them in our world all the time is never miss twice, right? Like if you're in one of those spots, like you're never going to nail your nutrition perfectly. You're never going to be able to sleep 8.5 hours a night unless you're Mandy. But being able to get to a point where you have that little workaround to make sure you get back on track quickly, because the cookie is not the thing that ruined the diet. It's the guilt and shame and everything else behind the cookie that makes one cookie into 10. And then that spiral continues. So I think being able to have that both understanding of the obstacle and
mm.
then that strategy to build on that is a nice way to go. So before we dive, I guess, into the systems aspect, which I think is a nice one to kind of walk through, Mandy, why do you think people kind of steer away from the obstacles, or what's the big one that comes up for you there?
Two thoughts there actually. One, I think we're overly optimistic when we're in this motivated space of, oh, I'm going to change all this stuff, especially at this time of year, right? We're getting to that, pointy end where there's New Year's resolutions and stuff being thought about. When you're in that motivated space, we're overly optimistic about how it's all going to go. And I think optimism can be the thing that holds us back because we don't recognize where those obstacles might be. But the other part of it is I think this is where data and tracking is super important. We've talked about tracking a little bit, I think recently, but the tracking in the sense of knowing your own patterns. We've all done, tried to get healthy before. Maybe we've done some sort of diet in the past, or we've done some sort of fitness regime in the past, or we've tried to get better with our sleep routines or whatever. We've all got data of what we've tried before and what has and hasn't worked. And so I think the way to address the obstacles is not look ahead and think what's going to come up, but look back and think what's got in the way before, because those are patterns that are probably going to recur for you down the track. And that can be invaluable because you can be like, I know what tripped me up last time, and this is how I'm going to avoid it next time. So rather than looking back on it as those were my failures, those were my test runs of what was going to get in the way. And then you can utilize that. That becomes a silver lining then of something you can use to progress you forward in this next attempt.
Yeah, you don't start again, you start from experience, and it just
Yeah.
allows you to kind of build up those levels. And I think looking at that in a way, I think there's a really interesting way to look at the way you talk to yourself. Maddie, we talked about this, I think, a couple of weeks ago now, with standing on the scales as one measurement, but
Mhm.
measuring how you talk to yourself about the result on the scales is its whole other measurement, right? And that
Mm.
in many ways becomes its more important measurements of how do you talk to yourself. And I think obstacles are kind of the same thing, right? And it really highlights this balance of a growth versus fixed mindset. If I say you're not good enough yet, the fixed mindset says, well, I guess I'm just stuck here and thanks for telling me I'm useless, right? Whereas
Mm.
the growth mindset says, I'm not there yet. What do I need to put in place? Where do I need to grow? What do I need to develop to get there?
Yeah.
And I think that obstacle component really highlights that for a lot of people, because if I say you're stuck if you don't fix this, you're like, oh, well, now it's all done.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
going to be able to move. Might as well fail now, right? Whereas that growth mindset really allows you to lean into, here's my obstacle, that here's my system, and this is how I'm going to get better. This is how I'm going to grow from this.
Yeah.
So if you do find yourself in that spot where you're leaning away from obstacles, maybe it's another growth opportunity, right? It's in that space where we're able to simply be better. So
Mm.
and I think a nice way to wrap that up as well is one of my early mentors in that space of progress for me found a really nice balance where it was like you're great where you are, but you can always be better. Like it's that
Mm.
subtle balance between like we're not creating that massive gap where there's such a deficiency that you have to change, otherwise you're worthless. But at the
Mm,
same time, staying still is stagnant, and there's always more possibility and opportunity to improve that is exciting and is a nice way to feel like you're moving forward. So, just a little note on that. I think it's nice to lean into that.
it's contentment coupled with growth
Yeah.
in the sense that you're content with who you are, but you also want to continue improving on that.
Totally, and I think it ebbs and flows, right? I don't think there's
Mm,
some magical bit in the middle. Maybe that's the best version of enlightenment. I'm not sure, but I'm not there yet. So I think it's just a nice thing to keep working between.
mm,
But once we've got those obstacles, then we can start building strategies. But I think
mm,
just being able to really highlight, like if you struggle to find the obstacles, a lot of the time you're blocking them out because as soon as you find them, you're telling you that you're worthless or that you can't achieve something and that you're stuck where you are. And I think that's just not true and not helpful. So
mm,
once we've got them and we've got those obstacles, a beautiful quote comes up for me, which is, "You don't rise to the level of your ambitions; we fall to the level of our systems." Right. So the whole
mm,
point that we bring up obstacles is to think about, okay, where are the points that we could fail, so that we can build some strategies now,
mm,
while you're in a motivated state, so that when you're a little less motivated and willpower's not as high, it's so much easier to just stay on track. And a strategy and structure and workshop that we do with all of our clients is it's not about a lack of discipline. It's about a lack of discipline and environment, right? It's about
mm,
putting yourself in a space that makes it so much easier to win on default. Because if you're trying not to drink, yet you spend every day in a bar, it's going to be so much harder than being in a spot where you're in a, you know, yoga retreat in the middle of Bali where alcohol's not served, right? Like neither of those probably your situation right now. They're extremes, but they do it highlight at least that position where environment has a role to play.
mm,
And if you can set up that little system that stops you from having ice cream each night, or it gets you to prompt you to get that workout in before you come home, that just becomes a system that you can lean on in order to win more often.
mm,
Um, Before we dive into the systems there, we've got kind of three sections. We call it the nudge, the this, then that, or the what's the last one?
mm. Half-ass is better than no ass.
That's the one. Yes. Funny. That one's always the hardest for me too. But I guess which one do you use the most, Mandy? Like out of those sort of nudges, what's one that shows up for you or that you
Mm.
personally use?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it depends on what the actual thing I'm trying to achieve is, and it might depend on the day a little bit. So I think a
Yeah.
nudge is really, really helpful in the sense of I know when this happens, then I do this. And that's particularly helpful if you're trying to build a new habit. Um, I think this then that is useful in a time when there's maybe disruption to normal routine and you're trying to protect a habit that you already have. You
Hmm.
know, I will do this before I do that, despite what else is going on. And then half ass is better than no ass, I think, is also useful in busy times where you maybe need to be a little bit lenient on yourself and not just be smashing yourself or beating yourself up about something. And I find this particularly with the training side of things that sometimes you have to remember that the ultimate goal is to move. It's not to track the best workout you've ever done in your life.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's not going to happen. And so you can easily just not do the thing. But if you've got in the back of your mind, actually, the goal is just to move in the first place. So go and do something. And if it's not the full thing. It's very much a combination of all of those things, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
hmm,
Interesting. Yeah. So let's. I think you've already done quite well at breaking that down. But if we look at the three, I guess the strategies that we have on the board, and you can probably have one that we haven't heard of, and I'd love to know what it is for you. But the first one, the nudge, is ultimately having that something constant in your day where it just becomes that reminder of action, right? Like you said, if there's something that you know you'll do every day, like lunch or getting into the car after work, it becomes a really nice prompt about, oh, okay, take 5 deep breaths now. That's your nudge to be like, oh yeah, remember that thing that you're going to do for you. Because so many of us just kind of run through our day, me included, where you just forget to do stuff because you're so focused on other tasks. This thing that is subtly different, but very much the same, where you're finding something where you have to do something before you get the other thing, right? So
hmm,
before I have, as a silly example, before I have the chocolate, I need to have the protein, right?
yeah.
If I need to do the workout before I sit on the couch, right? Like I've got that little system in place where, okay, Ollie, if you want that thing, let's do this thing first, right? I need to get this article written before I go for a walk outside. I think that personal rule set is a really nice way to set up. And for me personally, that's the one I use the most. I find myself using that to focus.
Mhm.
And it ties in very nicely to the time blocking. Like right before I go for that walk, I need to get this writing done. I need to get that project done in some form. So the this thing that I use all of the time. And then the half ass is better than no ass is a great way to look at, as you mentioned, the sort of 20-minute workout is much better than a 0-minute workout. And I
Mm.
think so many of us go, 20 minutes isn't as good as 120 minutes, so I won't bother. Right.
Mm. Mm.
And just getting to a place where you're finding those small wins in your day means that you're finding them more often than simply, well, it's not perfect today, so flog it, we'll start next week. Right.
Mm.
So those systems are versions that we use super often when we're workshopping with clients around a particular obstacle. So if you notice that that's coming up for you, you know what that personal tendency is for you, just a really nice one to build on. So
Mhm.
have a little think, right? We've talked about the goal. What are some of those goals that either you've written down or maybe this is the first thing you're thinking about now, first time you've set the goals in a while. Um, Either way, awesome to have you with us. Think about what those are, diving into the feelings and what that really means behind the scenes as to why that's important rather than just this kind of weird goal that sounds cool.
Mm.
We then go into the obstacles, what's really getting in the way, and then we talk about systems. When we've got that stuff right, does that feel more like a goal than an actual wish? Like that really feels like a strategy, a game plan, and I want to break through walls to start, right? Like I think it's just such a cool way to go that extra step with goals. And also, Mandy, the exact reason that I love podcasting, because the people that
Mm.
listen to podcasts for the most part are people that are in a position that want to grow in some form, want to be better in some way, and want to go deeper into the weeds of context, not just, oh, that sounds like a nice shiny new red button, I'll try that, right?
Mm.
And being able to dive deeper and deeper and really get that context to what you're doing really is the way that people succeed. And the reason I highlight that, I guess, is because logically people know that just setting a goal but not having a plan is not very helpful. But at the same time, it requires brain power, right?
Mm.
And most people don't want to use brain power. They just want to think about it, feels nice, and then move on. And because we're so distracted going from one chipmunk activity to the next, we never take that time to really chew through the fat a little bit and find that real meaning or
Mm.
system that's going to make things work, right? And that's fundamentally why coaching is so helpful, because we ask those provocative questions and it allows you to go a little bit deeper into what's actually happening. And if you're on this podcast, you're quite literally getting that experience from us now by going deeper into what's actually meaningful for you right now.
I think going through this full process with a goal as well actually allows you to battle test it a little bit too and
Yep.
check, is it actually something you truly want? Because I think, just like you said, sometimes we can have these high flying wishes or whatever that they seem like they'd be fun, like, but we don't necessarily take it all the way through and think, do I actually want to do the work required to get that goal? Is that truly what's important to me or not? So going through this process actually, it allows you to battle test the goal a little bit before you put 3 months effort into doing the thing, then find out actually, no, I don't want to do this. Because if you're not even prepared to put the energy into the planning and the navigation of the obstacles and all those sorts of things, then it's probably not that important to you potentially.
Yeah, and a classic example I brought up with our clients a couple of times, and he's probably sick of it by now. But through lockdowns, I listened to The Last Dance, which is very much a Netflix series I will recommend to anyone. I think it's put together really well. It really shows you the level of skill and attention to detail required to build a world class team. Uh, but by going through it, I felt very motivated for the first time in my life to go play basketball. Right, so I bought a basketball, went down to the courts with my wife, and shot about 2 hoops, and realized I was quite far off being pro basketball player. Certainly with one shoulder not working particularly well at the time. These sort of one arm hops don't work all that well. Um, but what that highlighted for me was that I felt motivated by this idea of being a basketball player, but I wasn't
Mm,
motivated by the required action steps on a very regular basis, right? Like dribbling every day, doing the shots every day, doing the speed and power work, the agility stuff
mm,
for about 5 years before I saw any level of competency, probably
mm.
7 for me, to get to a point that that would be, something I could really achieve. And even then, I'm too short. So there you go. Being able to get to a spot where you really fall in love with the process rather than falling in love with the goal is a concept that I think is used quite a lot, and I hope it hasn't lost its value because it's one of the most meaningful things around goal setting that needs to be put in place.
Mm,
Um, Another way of saying it is the man that loves walking will always walk further than the person who set a goal of walking, right? So it's
mm,
really allowing you to go deeper into, as Mandy said, the ability to really feel out, is this something I want to do for a really long period of time? Is that a goal that really feels right for me? or does it just seem like something I'm supposed to do, and I'm going
Mm,
to force myself through it for 2 months and realize I hate it, right? So
mm,
set the better goal from the start, right? Something you're not going to do every day is something you shouldn't do for one.
mm.
So there's a lot in there, but I think, yeah, really diving into that, you've got some thoughts.
I do. I do. I think about this in the context of people who are sort of at that point where maybe they've lost some weight and they've got like a last couple of kilos to lose.
Hmm.
And the first 10's easy, the last five or so, you've got to be quite specific with it.
Yep.
And everyone wants to lose that last three or four or five. But not everyone is particularly clear on how much effort it requires to get to it. And so I always have this conversation with clients of let's go to that 110% and actually shoot for it and achieve it and then see how it feels and then make the decision of whether you want to maintain the effort in order to keep it. And very often people get to the point where it's somewhere in the middle, where actually the number has less importance because it's truly about their energy, their health, their sleep, and all those other things. It's not about the specificity of the number. But I do like that, just actually go for it and see for a little bit and see, go to that 110% and just see is
Mm.
this what you feel like you want to do? It's no problem with buying the basketball and going down and shooting some hoops and being like, damn, I suck. Test it out. It's all learning, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny. I was going to go the other way because I think for me, I see so many people that work so hard over the course of 2 months to hit some sort of result, but they won't do half of the effort for a long period of time, right? So it's
Mm,
like they'll do 110%, but they know it's only for 6 weeks. So they'll
mm,
hold their breath and make it as uncomfortable as possible, which almost guarantees that they won't stick with it long term, right? Like they
yeah,
restrict
yeah,
it really hard rather than just doing a simple like 200 calorie drop. They'll do an 800 calorie drop
yeah.
and throw it, a marathon in every day just to make sure.
Mm.
um, and then at the end of that 6 weeks, they're absolutely burnt out. There's probably an injury or two. Hormones are completely suppressed, not to mention
Mm,
metabolism. So, for a lot of people that aren't already inside our world and seeing how we do things a little differently, I think it's a nice way to have this discussion around hope long term and that ability to look at like really having confidence in yourself that you'll still be doing this in 2 or 3 years. It's not
yeah.
just a set and forget or a set and do for 6 week goal and then move to something else, right? And I think
Mm,
if it's a goal that's not meaningful enough to really do for a year, this was something one of my mentors said multiple times to me because I was very much jumping from one thing to the next or doing
mm,
10 things at once. Is like, if you're not willing to do this for a year, it's not something that is worthwhile doing.
mm,
And I think
mm,
that's like a really cool way of looking at it, right? Like I was in the startup space and we were building different offers and doing different stuff. Every single offer that we put out into the market, I'm like, I am willing to do this for 10 years, right? Like I want to follow through on this and make sure that we really find that nuance that's going to make it special.
mm,
And if I'm not willing to go there, then I'm not going to start it, right? And I think
mm,
that's where you and I talk about all sorts of different areas that we can attack or develop or refine or put out into the world. But if we
mm.
aren't willing to really follow through and make that amazing, then we won't start it. And I think
Yeah, yeah.
with goals in general, that's a really nice threshold. Like, are you willing, maybe not a decade, but are you willing to put a year into this to really set up something that's meaningful long term?
Mm. I think that can be where coaching has so much value too, right? Is it someone else who is not biased but is just able to be a little bit more objective and talk you through those discussions of is this something that's truly worthwhile to you? Is it going to still have meaning in a year's time? Are you prepared to put it? You can kind of nut out all of those things with someone who's outside of it. I think that's a hugely valuable and perhaps underestimated power of having a coach to help you through some of those decisions and goals.
Totally. We saw it through, you're probably going to be listening to this in January. So, what we saw through December was this assumption that everyone goes backwards in December, right? And I can
Mm,
tell you right now that's not true. We've got a whole bunch of clients right now or in December that were making huge progress, and it really
mm,
allowed them to solidify steps that now they're just able to build on in January, February, etc.
mm,
And I guess one of the subtleties that allowed a lot of them to break that mold was their coach saying, "Really? Do you have to go backwards? I've got a whole bunch of clients that are doing really well. Would you like to be one of them?" Right?
mm,
And I think just breaking that mold, that breaking that assumption or societal norm that, oh, well, everyone drinks more alcohol in November or everyone just feels like everything's falling apart in December
yeah.
is just a nice way to sort of really take check of not just your physical diet, like what you're actually consuming, but also that mental diet. What are you allowing into your brain and what are you accepting at face value, right? Like that can be the news, that can be social media, but can also just be your friend group and that peer group where there's just a general assumption that things go backwards.
Yeah, yeah. Question everything, right? We're
Yeah.
just too willing to accept that, oh, this is the way it is. It's busy. No one's got time. Everyone's tired. Well,
Well,
I
and this is the fun part, right? Because when you've got just it only takes one or two people in your corner to really believe in you, help build up that hope a little bit.
mm,
Some of my favorite clients are ones that have got to 50 or 60, and they're like, all my mates are getting slow and old, and I feel the best I've ever felt. Like I feel
yeah.
stronger. I'm doing pull-ups. I'm getting fitter. I've got all this energy I want to use, and I think it can be so motivating to just have that audit to what you're listening to, so that you can keep or remove that filter or add that filter to see how you see the world,
Mm,
uh, and you can stay as strong and fit and healthy as you like for as long as possible, right? Whereas if you look around at just normal society, everyone's getting, poorer, older, fatter, and everything in between.
mm,
And I just think
mm.
that's something you choose to lean into or not.
It's totally a mindset thing, eh?
Yeah.
I don't read the news, but I did see this article the other day of a lady, a local lady here, which actually in Picton, and she's 70 something, and she just recently started powerlifting, and she's won like some national records, like for her age group in powerlifting. She can't quite lift as much as me, but she's doing very well.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, damn, I better actually get moving, otherwise
Yeah.
she'll take over. But those sort of stories, that they fire me up so much. 'Cause I'm
Yep.
like, there's someone who just looked outside of the norm and said, I just want to do that, so I'm going to do it. That sort of stuff. Oh, I love that stuff.
Yeah. And I think even coming back to the obstacle piece, right? I'm
Mm,
very aware that we are at least three. It probably is a bit more like 10 times more likely to look at the negative than we are the positive. So,
mm,
if you're someone that still thinks the news is actual news, you're entirely wrong. It's just this perception of what people will click on the most. And if something is negative, they're so much more likely to click on it. So you are literally clicking and absorbing negativity because that's the stuff that gets the most views, ratings, and of course, funding for them to put out the next news article. So being able to find something positive takes real work, right?
mm,
And being able to be really, really strong on what you allow in, right? It happened last Christmas. I know it's going to happen this Christmas around my family. Is they bloody watch TV when dinner's going, and I'm like, negativity and dinner are not a good combo, not just for my digestion, but my mental health. So, I very much made that a bit of a rule. Like, if I'm going to be here, that TV is off and we're going to have a dinner because I assumed that this was family time.
yeah.
So, being able to look at that space around what you allow in, both in the people that you're hiring or working with from a coaching perspective, but just general friend groups. I think many of us have heard
Mm,
that, we're the average of the five people we surround ourselves with, and that's so
mm,
real when it comes to just the standards you accept, right? And I think
mm,
that what you are tolerating is what you will receive, and if you tolerate all of this stuff, tolerate you to feel low energy, you tolerate for people to add this extra negativity on your plate, then it will just keep getting suppressed and keep getting pulled down. And I think it's
mm,
just the biggest part with this goal setting. When Mandy, I think you're in a spot where you've cultivated that group for yourself, so you can really get to feelings quickly, hopefully, and be in a spot where you really feel empowered to make goals. But something
mm,
that we were just talking about this with a client recently, where unfortunately a lot of partners, husbands, wives, etc., might not be on the same page as you right now. So going to feelings can feel like there's a real block getting in the way of what you're actually able to achieve and capable of achieving, because you just feel so disempowered to get there, right? And having
mm,
someone believing in you and raising that bar for you, even if it's just me on the other side of this microphone telling you like you are worth it and this is something you
mm,
can do, hopefully that's enough to just plug into and really pull the thread on,
mm,
because most people won't go there and don't think they have what they need to get there. And I think it's kind of like what we've gone through today.
mm.
You might not have it yet, but you can.
I think this is why goal setting is so important as well. And actually, it's okay to set a goal that seems small, but
Yeah.
if it allows you to do the thing and build the confidence that you can do the thing, then that's the best goal ever. Like, I think if there's a personality quirk here, some people just personally have a belief in themselves to be able to do things. They just assume they'll be able to. And then there's absolutely people who assume, and it's probably from childhood, I don't know, but I'm not a psychologist, but assume they won't be able to do something. And so their immediate response is a negative reaction to something. But you can change that. You can challenge everything that your mind brings up. And I think setting a goal that is it's a little stretch, but it's still achievable for wherever you're at this point in time, allows you to achieve it, tick it off, feel awesome about it, and build that confidence over time by repeatedly stacking more and more successes on top of each other. And I think that's another thing with the whole goal setting is if you set the goal way beyond what you currently can achieve and you constantly miss it, you're reinforcing the fact that you constantly miss. So it's kind of like finding that line, of not going.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice way of looking at what we talked about last week, which was the are you needing the accelerator or the brake pedal,
Mm,
right? Like you
mm,
probably know yourself in regards to you push too hard and you fizzle out, or you
mm,
don't push enough and you need a bit of a kick in the bum. This
yeah.
kind of goes down that discussion a little bit in regards to very much this. I guess a nice frame of reference to really self-identify which one you are is: would you rather set a goal so high that when you hit 80% you feel motivated to push harder next time?
Mm,
Or are you someone that would prefer to set a smaller goal, achieve it, so you've got a bit more fuel in the tank to go harder next time? All right. And I
mm,
think being able to ask that of you personally rather than what other people would look at you or perceive you as by going small or going big allows you to know what's really meaningful to you, right? Because for me
mhm,
personally, I know that if I set a really big goal and I miss it, there's this gap that fuels me. But
yeah,
at the
yeah.
same time, I need to be very mindful that that gap is not a beating up process in order to get there, right? Like, oh
Mm,
God, you need to do so much better next time. Otherwise, that's not going to happen. Like, you need
mm,
to push harder, although very effective, not particularly positive, right?
yeah.
Whereas the first goal is, okay, well, I want to achieve this big thing, but if I can hit this first rung, I can prove to myself that I can do it and I'm going to go for the next one.
Mm,
And it's not right or wrong, and again, I think being honest, I read a really beautiful book lately that was just being very honest about like what fuels you and being honest about what fuels you, right?
mm,
And I think there's sort of, it's not all pleasure and it's not, hopefully not all pain. It's probably a mix of
mm,
two. But knowing what's most effective for you in that particular season, I think is a really nice way to be honest with both your goals as well. And then what milestone you set. Is this big, hairy goal that requires a lot of effort and focus for you? Or is it a first milestone and really get that win in the bag and go from there? All right. Um, Really interesting to see or think through.
and I think it's possible that you need different things in different areas. So
Yeah.
potentially, if we bring this back around to health, health might be something which you've tried and feel like you failed at multiple times. So your confidence in your ability to do this thing is at an all-time low. Whereas you might be, hugely successful in your business or something like that. So your confidence there is really high, and your belief in your ability to do the thing. So your motivator in business might be quite different than how you set a goal for health, where you just need to rebuild that confidence level somewhat.
Ah, that's so I'm so glad you went there. It was a bit that I felt I was missing from that because you can talk to a client. We do this all the time, right? That sort of association between what they're great at and what they'd like to be better
Mm,
at, right?
mm,
So as you said, I've got one client that always comes to mind that he said to me, and you use your version of this, but he's like, look, I feel like the king in the boardroom and I feel like the peasant in the gym, right? Like there was just
mm,
such a polar opposite in regards to how he felt in both those locations. So in a business environment, you'll set the big, hairy, audacious goal because you know that you've got so much fuel in the tank to go hard and you know that you can back yourself when it gets hard. Versus if you feel like things are a little bit shaky on the health side, then set that first goal, right? Because if you just do it from what's happening externally or what you should be doing, you'll set that big goal like you do in business or how you think people need to perceive you, and you won't hit it, and then you'll kind of steer a different direction very quickly. Whereas if you set that first milestone and build from there, and I think if you are in a place, again, if you know yourself that you've set a few New Year's resolutions over time, but you haven't hit them in a row, set a smaller goal. Start
mm.
there, build some confidence in the space, and build that pillar up a bit so that you can put them alongside other areas of competency inside your life.
Yeah, yeah. There's I always say to people, you can't scale a habit you can't start. So set it in a way that you can actually just be consistent with it to begin with. It builds that momentum and it builds that confidence so that you can actually grow it from there. And there's a really good visual picture of two ladders side by side and two people trying to climb, and one's got the rungs really close together and one's got them so far apart he can't even get onto the bottom one. And I think that always sticks in my head in this situation is if your confidence has been knocked, just drop it down a little bit so you can actually start moving forward.
Yeah, perfect visual. All right. Hey, I think we're going to finish this one here, guys, but I think hopefully this gives you a little bit of awareness around our thought process around goal setting. It goes, I think we went quite a few layers deeper there. I really like, hopefully you like it too, but the sort of ability to bounce between thoughts and really, uh, I guess, really explore the understanding of why I think it works so well and what we've seen work with clients. And kind of invite you into our world a little bit there, so that if this is something you're wanting to do, uh, we can make sure it's a little bit more successful. And the big part with building that confidence, as we've talked about so much today, is having proof that it works. And by creating smaller milestones and more bulletproof strategies to make sure that you can just follow through on those small promises to yourself, you'll be pretty proud of yourself, I think, by the time you get to the end of the year. And you've just done more of the little stuff, right? Because that ultimately accumulates to the big stuff too.
Mm.
So we're going to leave that one there. Hopefully, if you're listening to this around January, there's some time and space that you're really taking to really set those intentions, but by adding those layers to really make this a strategy. If you do want to go deeper into this, you do want to look at what coaching would look like alongside our team to really create a blueprint based on these goals you've just set, then I'll drop a link below so that you can book in with our team, or I'm sure you can find us somewhere to on our website in order to book in with our coaches, because we'd love to see if and where we can help and really start to just see how we can get your body on your side to help you get there in an easier or faster way as well. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed today, and we'll see you then.